Every trader thinks they can handle emotion until the market tests their soul. That's where Jesse Livermore separated himself from the crowd. It wasn't his strategy, it wasn't his timing, it wasn't even his brilliance. It was something deeper, quieter, and infinitely harder to master: emotional detachment. Most traders think discipline is about rules, but Livermore knew it's about distance, the ability to stand inside the storm, to hear the chaos, feel the fear, and still not let it move you. He understood that the greatest weapon in speculation isn't knowledge, it's calm. It's the power to remain unshaken when everyone else is crumbling under noise, greed, and panic. Livermore once said, "The game of speculation is the most uniformly fascinating game in the world, but it is not a game for the stupid, the mentally lazy, or the emotional." That word, emotional, is everything, because emotion is the silent hand that turns smart traders into reckless gamblers. It's not the loss that destroys them, it's the reaction to the loss. Every chart, every signal, every candle is an invitation, not to act, but to react. And that's where 90% of traders fail. They don't trade the market, they trade their own feelings about it. Livermore learned this the brutal way. He built fortunes and lost them, not because of poor analysis, but because, like every human being, he was tempted by his own emotions: greed during rallies, fear during crashes, hope during pain. It took him years to understand that his mind, not the market, was the real battlefield. That emotional detachment wasn't coldness, it was control. It was freedom from bias. It was the difference between watching the tape and obeying it. That's what this story is about. Not just Livermore's wins, but how he won. The inner process that made him immune to the hysteria that destroys others. Because here's the paradox: the more emotionally involved you are, the less clearly you can see. The market doesn't punish ignorance, it punishes attachment. So tonight, we'll step into Livermore's mind, the way he built emotional distance without losing intuition. We'll explore the moments he had to detach from everything: his ideas, his pride, even his profits, just to survive another day. And by the end, you'll understand why the greatest traders don't chase control, they release it. So let me ask you, when you lose a trade, do you really move on, or do you carry it into the next one? Be honest. Comment below, because that question reveals more about your future as a trader than any technical setup ever will. Next, we'll dive into the paradox of this mindset, the inner conflict that every trader must face: how to stay detached without losing your edge. Detachment sounds noble until it feels impossible. That's the paradox every trader faces. We're told to stay calm, to control our emotions, to think logically, but how do you remain detached from something you've invested yourself into? Your time, your effort, your belief, your money. The market doesn't just test your knowledge, it tests your ability to stay unmoved while your identity is on the line. You see, emotional detachment isn't natural, it's learned, because the human brain is built for survival, not speculation. When you see red on your screen, your mind screams danger. When you see green, it whispers opportunity. And both are lies, because both are emotional signals, not rational ones. Livermore understood that paradox deeply. He said, "The average man doesn't wish to be told that it is a bull or bear market. What he desires is to be told specifically which stock to buy or sell." Why? Because emotion wants certainty, and the market offers none. The inner conflict of every trader lies right here. To win, you must participate in the most emotional arena on earth, but to survive, you must remain completely unemotional. It's a contradiction that destroys most. They try to control their feelings, but control isn't the answer. Control is resistance, and what you resist only grows stronger. Livermore discovered a different path. He didn't suppress emotion, he separated from it. He became the observer of his reactions, not the slave to them. When fear whispered, "Get out," he listened, not to obey it, but to understand why it appeared. When greed said, "Add more," he paused, not to argue, but to analyze what triggered it. That's emotional detachment, not the absence of feeling, but the awareness of feeling without identification. You don't silence emotion, you study it. Most traders fail because they think detachment means apathy. It doesn't. Detachment doesn't kill passion, it refines it. It strips away impulse so that only intention remains. Livermore used to watch the tape for hours without taking a single trade. He'd say, "The big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting." That's not patience, that's control through detachment, because waiting requires calm, and calm requires separation. Here's the paradox in full. To win, you must care deeply about the outcome, yet think as if it means nothing. You must trade with conviction, yet be ready to abandon it instantly. You must be passionate enough to act, yet detached enough to walk away. It's a psychological tension that few can endure, because ego always wants to intervene. Ego wants to fix a losing trade. Ego wants to prove it was right. But Livermore learned that ego and detachment cannot coexist. He wrote, "A man must always remember that the stock market is never wrong. It is people who are wrong, and they must change their minds. And changing your mind, that's the ultimate form of detachment. It's saying, I was wrong, without shame, without hesitation, without emotion. That's the real challenge, not making money, but making peace with uncertainty. So I'll ask you this. When the market moves against you, do you feel attacked or do you feel informed? Comment below, because that answer defines whether you're trading your system or your emotions. Next, we'll step into the psychological trap, the hidden mechanism inside every trader's mind that makes emotional detachment feel impossible, and how Livermore learned to escape it. The greatest danger in trading isn't loss, it's attachment, not to money, but to meaning. Because every trade you take isn't just a position on a chart, it's a reflection of your identity. When you win, you feel intelligent. When you lose, you feel exposed. And that's the trap Jesse Livermore spent his life trying to escape. He realized that the moment you connect your self-worth to your P&L, you stop seeing the market for what it is, a mirror of behavior. Instead, you start seeing it as a judge, a place where every tick feels personal, where every fluctuation whispers something about your worth. That's not trading, that's self-sabotage. Livermore called this the disease of the ego. He said, "The human side of every person is the greatest enemy of the average investor or speculator. And that human side, the need to be right, to prove, to redeem, is what destroys traders long before losses ever do." Think about it. When you're in profit, you hold on too long because you want more. When you're in loss, you hold on too long because you can't admit you're wrong. Both are emotional reactions disguised as logic, and they're the reason most traders fail. Livermore knew this cycle intimately. He made and lost several fortunes. Each loss, he later said, wasn't caused by market manipulation or bad luck. It was caused by his inability to stay detached. He would analyze perfectly, time entries precisely, then violate his own rules because emotion slipped through the cracks, disguised as conviction. He once wrote, "It was never my thinking that made the big money for me. It was my sitting." But sitting wasn't just about waiting for trades to mature. It was about sitting through emotion without reacting. Because emotion is motion, and motion in markets without clarity is chaos. The trap goes deeper. Every time you react emotionally, your brain releases dopamine, that chemical hit that rewards you for action. You feel alive when you do something. That's why traders chase setups, overtrade, revenge trade. They mistake activity for control. But Livermore understood, the market punishes need. The more you need to act, the more you act irrationally. He learned to reverse the equation. He didn't trade to feel something, he traded to see something. He said, "A man must study his mistakes, for they are his greatest teacher." Livermore treated every emotional impulse as data. Every moment of impatience, every rush of hope, every wave of fear, he dissected it. He didn't ask, why did the market move? He asked, why did I move? That's how he began developing his emotional detachment. He transformed awareness into armor. And awareness doesn't come from avoiding emotion, it comes from studying it like a scientist. Here's the truth most traders never admit. They don't want detachment, they want comfort. They want the illusion of control. They want the feeling that they can predict, dominate, and win. But Livermore knew that's exactly what the market uses against you. The market doesn't have enemies, it only has participants who can't see beyond themselves. He once wrote in his private notes, "I lost because I hoped. I lost because I feared. I lost because I doubted myself when I should have believed, and believed when I should have doubted." That's not just Livermore's confession, that's every trader's confession. Because in the end, emotional detachment isn't about being calm, it's about being honest. Honest enough to say, my feelings are not facts, my beliefs are not reality, my comfort is not truth. That honesty, that radical self-awareness, is what allowed Livermore to evolve from a man who traded emotion to a man who observed it. So, let me ask you this. Do you analyze your charts more than you analyze your reactions? Comment your answer below, because if you don't study your emotions will study you. Next, we'll step into Livermore's perspective, how he turned emotional detachment into an actual system of thinking, and why his approach remains the blueprint for modern trading psychology. To beat the market, you must first beat yourself. That was Jesse Livermore's law, not just a belief, but a discipline carved from loss. He realized that emotional detachment wasn't a feeling, it was a practice, a system, something he could train, like a muscle, until it became reflex. Livermore saw the market not as numbers or noise, but as a mirror reflecting mass psychology. He wasn't predicting price, he was studying emotion in motion. He said, the market does not beat them, they beat themselves, because though they have brains, they cannot sit tight. He understood that every tick, every surge, every crash was just human emotions scaled to global proportion, fear expanding, greed contracting, hope collapsing. And so, while others tried to outsmart the market, he trained himself to outfeel it, not by reacting, but by recognizing the feeling and stepping outside it. That's emotional detachment, not suppression, not ignorance, but awareness so sharp it separates you from the herd. To Livermore, detachment started with observation. He believed a speculator's first duty was not to act, but to watch. He'd stand in his office for hours, staring at the ticker tape, not trading, just studying. He wasn't waiting for the market to confirm his bias. He was waiting for himself to become emotionally neutral. Because any decision made from excitement or fear, he said, belongs to the market, not to me. He built habits that enforced this detachment. He never traded on tips. He ignored rumors, predictions, and opinions. He avoided crowds, not because he disliked people, but because he understood the psychology of influence. He said, the crowd always moves in the wrong direction at the right time. And why? Because crowds are emotional, and emotion, by nature, is reactive. Livermore saw himself as the counterweight to that emotion. Where others felt panic, he practiced stillness. Where others felt euphoria, he imposed caution. He thought like a scientist observing a specimen, and the specimen was himself. He believed every trader had two selves, the operator, rational, methodical, detached, the emotional self, impulsive, hopeful, afraid. The war between them never ends, but the operator wins only when he acts without interference from the other. And that's why Livermore designed what I call the operator's code, his formula for emotional neutrality. Here's what that looked like in practice. He waited for confirmation, not temptation. No matter how good the setup looked, if it felt urgent, he waited, because urgency is emotion in disguise. He sized positions based on clarity, not confidence. Confidence fluctuates, clarity doesn't. He refused to watch every tick once a trade was on. He said, a man cannot be both speculator and spectator. Watching the market constantly triggers feeling, and feeling destroys detachment. He treated losses like data. Each loss revealed something about his psychology, not his strategy. He recorded it, studied it, detached from it. Livermore used his detachment to turn patience into profit. He didn't chase moves, he let the market come to him. He understood that emotional neutrality was like waiting for clear weather before setting sail. Because when the sea is storming, it's not bravery that saves you, it's restraint. He once told a colleague, the man who can both be right and sit tight is rare, but it is this man who profits. That phrase, sit tight, sounds simple, but it's the essence of emotional detachment. To sit through noise, to sit through doubt, to sit through temptation, and do nothing. Livermore's perspective wasn't cold-blooded, it was enlightened. He didn't detach to escape emotion, he detached to see it clearly, to understand that his edge came not from predicting the market, but from mastering his internal responses to it. He realized that the market would always be irrational, but his reaction didn't have to be. That's how he won big, not because he knew the future, but because he could stand still when everyone else was running. So I'll ask you this, when chaos hits your screen, can you wait? Can you do nothing when your entire body screams to act?
Comment below, because that's the line that separates the average trader from the disciplined speculator. In the next section, we'll bring this philosophy to life through a real-world story of a trader who tried to apply Livermore's principle and learned just how costly emotion can be.
The hardest trade to make is the one that costs your comfort. There was a trader named Aaron, sharp, analytical, obsessed with precision. He had spent years studying Jesse Livermore's philosophy, memorizing every quote, every lesson. He believed he was detached, calm, collected, immune to noise. But the market always finds your weak spot and exposes it. Aaron had been following a stock for weeks. He had the data, the setup, the confirmation. Everything aligned perfectly. The breakout was clean, the volume strong. He entered heavy. It moved beautifully for 2 days. Then, the third day, something changed. Volume dried up, momentum faded. But Aaron stayed. He told himself, this is normal, just volatility. He wasn't watching the chart anymore. He was watching his expectation. The market didn't care. By the end of the week, his profit was gone. By Monday, he was red. He looked at his screen, eyes locked, jaw tight, pulse racing. He remembered Livermore's rule. The market is never wrong. Opinions often are. But that didn't matter, because Aaron wasn't fighting the market anymore. He was fighting himself. He moved his stop, then he removed it. He said he was giving it space, but in truth, he was protecting his ego. Every tick lower wasn't just a price drop, it was a wound to his identity. That's the hidden danger of attachment. It blinds you not to information, but to yourself. Days passed, the loss deepened. He couldn't sleep. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., refreshing futures, hoping for a bounce that never came. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about redemption. That's when he finally understood what Livermore meant by cold-bloodedness. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you act correctly while you feel everything. So he did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He cut the trade. Not to save capital, but to save clarity. The loss stung, but in that moment, something inside him broke cleanly. He realized he had been living 2 lives, the logical analyst and the emotional gambler, and only one could survive. He started journaling, not about patterns or signals, but about states of mind. He noted when he felt urgency, when he felt hope, when he felt fear. He began to see the rhythm of his emotions the same way Livermore read the tape. Every spike, every dip, every pause. Over time, he noticed something miraculous. The more he observed his feelings, the less they controlled him. The more he detached, the clearer his decisions became. He wasn't trading to win anymore. He was trading to understand. And that shift, from reaction to reflection, was the birth of discipline. Livermore lived that same evolution. He said, after losing millions, I realized it wasn't the market I needed to study, it was myself. That's what Aaron did. And eventually, he learned what Livermore called the emotional law of markets. When you detach from outcomes, you begin to see truth. One night, after closing a week of clean, consistent trades, Aaron looked at his equity curve. Smooth, steady, nothing dramatic, and he smiled. Not because he made money, but because he finally understood what it meant to trade without identity. That's the point of Livermore's philosophy. Detachment isn't the absence of feeling, it's the victory of observation over impulse. It's freedom from noise, internal and external. So, I'll ask you this. Have you ever stayed in a trade, not because it was logical, but because you didn't want to admit you were wrong? Comment below, because that moment defines every trader's journey, from emotion to mastery. Next, we step into the darkness, the emotional low point, when detachment collapses, when the mind cracks, and when Livermore himself faced the same storm that took everything he'd built and still found clarity on the other side. Every trader meets the day when the market stops testing their skill and starts testing their sanity. That day came for Jesse Livermore more than once. He was a man who'd made and lost fortunes so vast they shook Wall Street itself. But it wasn't the money that broke him, it was the emotion behind it. After one of his greatest losses, a loss so deep it wiped out years of triumph, Livermore disappeared from the floor. No telegrams, no trades, just silence.
He retreated to his home, curtains drawn, notebooks open, not to analyze the market, but to dissect his mind. He later wrote that during those weeks, he realized something terrifying. He hadn't lost to the market, he'd lost to his attachment to being right. He couldn't forgive himself for feeling emotion, and that guilt nearly destroyed him. He said, "The greatest mistake a man can make is to think his feelings matter to the market. And yet, how could they not? We are human. We care. We feel the sting of loss like fire under the skin. We crave redemption. We want control." That's what makes trading not a game of intellect, but a war of endurance. Livermore realized that emotional detachment wasn't a natural state. It was a discipline born from breakdown. You don't achieve it by meditation or mantra. You achieve it when you've been burned so many times by your own feelings that detachment becomes survival. He went back through every major failure, 1906, 1917, 1929. He saw the pattern. Every collapse began not with a bad idea, but with a moment of emotion, a moment of excitement, of overconfidence, of revenge. Every time, he broke his own rules because he let his feeling override his framework. That was the real loss, not the money, the clarity. He realized the market never beats you, it just exposes who you already are. That's the storm every trader must face. When your system fails, your capital bleeds, your confidence shatters, you're left alone with the truth. You can either spiral into fear or finally detach from the illusion of control. That's the breaking point. And for Livermore, as for every disciplined trader, that breaking point became rebirth. He rebuilt himself by rebuilding his thinking. He stopped asking, "How do I win?" and started asking, "How do I stay clear?" Because when clarity returns, so does control. Modern traders face the same moment. Aaron, the trader from our last story, faced his after a streak of consecutive losses. He started doubting everything, his plan, his system, even his intelligence. But then he remembered Livermore's quote that he'd written on a sticky note above his monitor. "A man must study himself, for he is the only variable he can control." He stopped trading for a week. No charts, no news. He just observed himself. He wrote about his fears, his habits, the subtle moments when greed disguised itself as opportunity, the times when boredom masqueraded as intuition. And slowly, like Livermore before him, he realized the secret. Emotional detachment isn't the end of emotion, it's mastery through emotion. It's not distance, it's dominance. Because in that silence, when the noise fades, when the losses settle, when the illusion burns away, what's left is something pure, awareness. And from awareness, discipline grows. And from discipline, clarity returns. That was Livermore's turning point. That was Aaron's rebirth. And if you've ever sat there staring at a screen in disbelief, promising yourself you'll never make that same mistake again, that can be yours too. So let me ask, have you ever hit that wall where your confidence dies before your capital does? Comment below, because that wall is not your ending, it's your invitation to evolve. Next, we move to the final act, the cinematic conclusion, how Livermore turned emotional detachment into his legacy, and how you can carry that weapon into your own trading life.
Emotional detachment isn't the absence of feeling, it's the presence of control. That was Jesse Livermore's real secret. Not his timing, not his tape reading, not his strategy. His power came from what he didn't do. He didn't react. He didn't chase. He didn't argue with truth. He learned that the market doesn't destroy you, your emotions do. And if you can master that, if you can remain calm when your heart screams to act, then you possess what few ever will: clarity in chaos. Livermore's detachment was forged in the same fire that burns every trader. He didn't start cold-blooded. He became cold-blooded. Each failure stripped him of something unnecessary: pride, hope, fear, until only discipline remained. That was his evolution. He used to say, "The market is human nature on display, and human nature never changes." And that's why his lessons never age. Because while technology, markets, and platforms evolve, the mind behind the trade remains the same. We are still the same creatures of impulse, still ruled by greed and fear, still prisoners of our own stories. But Livermore discovered a way out, not through prediction, but through presence.
He detached not to escape emotion, but to witness it without obeying it. That's what made him a speculator, not just a trader. Think about it. The average trader reacts to the market like a puppet, pulled by strings of excitement and panic. A true speculator, as Livermore defined it, cuts those strings. He doesn't seek control of the market, he seeks control of himself. That's why emotional detachment isn't weakness, it's the ultimate strength. Because when others lose their nerve, you remain centered. When others chase certainty, you stay patient. When others drown in emotion, you walk on the surface, calm, calculating, awake. Livermore's biggest wins didn't come when he was confident, they came when he was clear. He didn't act from excitement, he acted from alignment. No noise, no haste, no need. He once said, "The big money is made by the man who sits tight." But sitting tight isn't about inaction, it's about emotional stillness. It's the state of knowing you don't have to prove anything to the market because you've already proven it to yourself. That's the difference between reacting and ruling, between gambling and mastering, between trading with emotion and trading with awareness. So, as your screen lights up tomorrow morning and you feel that flicker of excitement, that twinge of fear, that pulse of hope, remember this: you can't stop emotion, but you can stop believing it. That's what Livermore did. That's what separates the disciplined from the desperate. Emotional detachment isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. It's not about ignoring your humanity, it's about mastering it. Because in the end, the greatest traders don't trade the market, they trade themselves. And that's what this game really is. Not a test of skill, but a test of self. Not a battle with others, but a battle with ego. So, if you take one thing from Livermore's legacy, let it be this: calm is your weapon, clarity is your edge, detachment is your freedom. Because in the market, as in life, those who control their emotions control their destiny. If this story spoke to you, comment below. I choose clarity over emotion. Let's fill the comments with discipline, because the next generation of traders will be shaped by how we think, not just how we trade.